I was 18 years old at the time. It was my senior year of high school, and I was one final project away from being finished for the year. I was a huge art fanatic and dreamed of continuing my education come freshman year of college. The assignment given by my teacher was to sketch a real scenic landscape of our choosing. Many of my friends in class were just making up a spot and sketching someone else's photograph. But my desire to pursue art as a profession led me to follow through with the actual intended way to complete the assignment. So I decided to head out to Mueller State Park alone. Looking back, I realized I was pretty naive about hiking and stuff. I didn't even bring a map. I just figured I'd find a nice spot and start drawing. It wasn't until later that I realized how dangerous it could have been. But at the time, I was just focused on capturing the beauty of nature on paper. The drive took several hours, and once I parked my vehicle, I made my way down a small path. The path started out easy at first, and I'd occasionally pass a fellow hiker. But the longer I hiked, the less company I encountered. With each step, the trail grew steeper, and I found myself trying to remember certain landmarks on the path to help make my return trip easier. I also have to add that my phone had no service, since Mueller State Park was in such an isolated area of Colorado. Despite my lack of experience, I pressed on, determined to reach my destination. The view was breathtaking, mountains stretching as far as the eye could see. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, and it was the very reason I wanted to actually participate in the final project. I sat there sketching the landscape for about an hour. By this time, the sun was beginning to disappear beyond the mountains in the distance, when suddenly, out of nowhere, a man's voice pierced the air behind me. "Great view, isn't it?" Startled, I turned to see a man with a scarred face, a long black beard, and greasy hair, standing a few feet away from me. Uncomfortably acknowledging the man's comment about the view, I quickly returned my focus to my sketchpad. As a naturally introverted person, I hoped that it would signal the end of our interaction. But as I continued to sketch, I couldn't shake the feeling of his presence behind me. I could hear him breathing. I could make out the sound of his lips smacking, as if he were chewing a piece of bubblegum. With a sense of unease creeping over me, I turned to him, attempting to make small talk about the picture I was sketching. However, he simply grunted in response, his eyes glinting with a strange intensity as he began to whistle. A chill ran down my spine as he began to laugh, the sound echoing through the quiet forest surrounding us. Without another word, he turned and began to walk away down the trail, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and a sense of dread hanging in the air. His whistle soon faded as he walked further up along the trail. I sat there thinking about how weird that guy was acting. By this time, the sun was now completely gone, and the little bit of light that remained was quickly fading. I packed my bags and headed down the original trail that I'd came from. With each step, the trail grew darker as the massive ponderosa pines blocked the little sunlight that was left. Anxiety began to knot up my stomach, and I could hardly catch my breath as I began to hastily make my way down the trail. The path looked completely different now in the evening time, and every so often I'd get that gut instinct that I was just being followed. You know that feeling you get when you're walking in the woods and you hear the crunch of the leaves under your feet and you begin to think something's walking behind you? Then you decided to run and those sounds chase you even faster? Yeah, that's how I felt. I was halfway down in my descent, and I stopped to see if my phone's GPS was now working. As I stood there in silence scrolling through my phone, I heard the man's whistling once more, followed by his laughter. "Hey, let me see that picture you were drawing." My heart skipped a beat. He was getting closer and walking down the trail I just came from. He was following me. Adrenaline coursed through my veins and I took off sprinting. In the distance, I could hear him laughing even louder as I serpentined down the trail. With each step, my only thought was, whatever you do, don't stop and don't fall. I ran for a solid 10 minutes and found the parking area where I left my car. This late in the day, my vehicle was the last one there, and I got in my car and left. I don't know exactly who the guy was, or what his intentions were, but I do know I will never go out hiking alone again. I was in college at the time. I went to a university near Yellowstone National Park. I really took my education seriously, since one day I ultimately wanted to become a park ranger. I really enjoyed being outdoors. It was always peaceful out in nature, and that's what I wanted to do for my career. Be in nature. I was currently taking a course in wilderness survival. The last week of school was when we had to do our performance standards in front of our instructors. This was basically us having to build a shelter, start a primitive campfire, identify a few plant species, and be able to forage for food, things like that. The term we called it was backcountry camping. Like I mentioned earlier, our university was near Yellowstone National Park, so that's where we were headed for the next 2 days. On the first day of our trip, we met at our designated parking area inside Yellowstone. With only our rucksacks, we did a 7-mile hike into the park. Needless to say, we were far from anyone. We finally made it to the spot where we'd set up our shelters for the instructors. I used a tarp to construct a simple A-frame shelter. For anyone who doesn't know, in an A-frame style shelter, both the front and the back of the tent were left open, which exposed you to the elements. I say that because that's important for later on in the story. Anyways, once we built our shelters, we spent the next several hours away from camp trail walking. As we walked through the woods, we were finding tinder for our campfire, as well as foraging for berries and identifying plants. When we returned to camp, we found that all of our tents and belongings were scattered. I will add it was pretty windy that day, so it could have been that, or it could have been a bear looking for food. But as weird as it was at the time, we didn't think too much into it. It began getting darker and we set up the campfire. As we sat there, we were met with an odd-sounding cry. It was strange. It sounded like it could be a human, or it could be an animal. But whatever it was, it sounded like it was in extreme, agonizing pain, like a deer in the jaws of a wolf, not dead, but barely alive to muster out some final cries before its final breath. This sound went on for about 10 minutes. Our instructors stood together off to the side of the camp and decided that 2 of them would go check out to see what the cry was. Again, the noise sounded higher pitched, like it could be a woman. They thought by slim chance it could be another hiker who happened to be in the area might need help. The 2 instructors left and 1 stayed behind with us. While they were gone, the noise stopped, and after about 15 minutes they returned. They told us they didn't see anything and that it was probably just an animal. We all slowly fell asleep that night in our individual tents. My tent was situated where my head was facing the campfire, and my feet were facing the dark woods. That's why I mentioned earlier about the tent's layout being open on both sides. Because on the feet side of my tent was total darkness, and it felt like at any moment someone's hands would appear and rip me out of my tent. It took me about an hour to finally fall asleep. At around 2 in the morning, I was awoken by that horrific scream again. It came from somewhere out in the woods behind my tent. I turned on my flashlight and directed the beam in the direction of the sound. As I peer into the depths of the woods, I noticed a movement, a dark shape shifting among the trees. The figure walking closer began to take on a shape unlike anything I've encountered. It stood tall and was skeletal. Its limbs stretched unnaturally towards the ground. Its skin, if you could call it that, was pale and stretched taut over its gaunt frame, almost translucent in places. The creature's eyes illuminated in my flashlight's beam. Antlers sprouted from its head, and it moved with an unsettling, silent, and predatory grace, as if a hunter walking in the woods. I start to flail around and kick towards the campfire. I let out a blood-curdling scream as my flashlight's beam parted with the figure. At this time, a few of my classmates woke up, startled, and everyone began turning on their flashlights to render aid. My instructors questioned if everything was all right. At this time, my flashlight was repositioned towards the area where I'd first seen the creature, and it was gone. This was where I didn't know what to do. I really didn't want to say what I think I saw, because I didn't want to be made fun of by my classmates. So I ended up lying instead, saying that I saw a small black bear outside my tent, and it startled me. Everyone laughed it off and said I was the hero, but I knew deep down inside that was no damn bear. I stayed awake for the rest of the night and couldn't sleep. The next day we packed up our site and were about to head out, but there off in the distance, in the direction I saw the creature last night, stood a lone frail deer. It just sat there watching us unnaturally as we finished stowing our gear back into our rucksacks. But this deer looked pale and sickly. Its fur was matted and patchy. You could see its ribcage with each shallow, rapid breath. My instructor advised us that the deer most likely had a disease and was wanting us to feed it scraps of food from our camp. We began walking away from the campsite back towards the cars, and that pale, sickly deer never moved, and it didn't take his eyes off of us. I don't know what the hell it was that I saw that night, but ever since then I haven't been connected to nature as much, and I never ended up pursuing the whole park ranger career like I originally wanted. I just haven't been able to enjoy anything outdoors now. What do y'all think it was? Thanks for tuning into the channel. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And make sure you hit the bell notification to be alerted whenever I post a video. Let me know in the comments section what you think about today's stories. And until next time, stay sinister.